Angie Dodge was just 18, full of dreams and life. Christopher Tapp was a confused young man who confessed to a crime he didn't commit. And Brian Drips, the real killer, lived right across the street the entire time. This isn't just a murder story. It's a chilling tale of injustice, deception, and a twist so wild no one saw it coming. Idaho Falls in the mid-90s was the kind of town where nothing truly terrible ever happened. Nestled in eastern Idaho, it was quiet, familiar, and safe. Most families had lived there for generations, and neighbors still greeted each other with smiles across white picket fences. People left their cars unlocked. Children rode their bikes freely. It was the kind of place where tragedy felt like something that only happened far away, on the news, never here. But that illusion shattered completely on June 13, 1996. That morning began like any other. The sun was out early, casting a soft golden glow over the town. But the calm quickly broke when a friend stopped by Angie Dodge's apartment. Angie hadn't shown up for work. That was unusual. She had just started her new job and was full of excitement about her future. After knocking several times and getting no answer, her friend decided to go in. What she found inside would haunt the town forever. Angie's body was discovered in her bedroom. She had been brutally murdered, her throat slashed, and her body left in a horrifying state. There were clear signs of a violent struggle, and evidence suggested the attack had been frenzied, vicious, and without mercy. Her small apartment, which she had only moved into recently, was turned into a crime scene. Blood stained the carpet, and her belongings were scattered. As though chaos had passed through every room. The news spread quickly through Idaho Falls. Angie Dodge, just 18 years old, full of life, and with dreams of becoming a forensic scientist, was gone. Her death didn't just shock the community. It stunned them into silence. This was a town where bad things weren't supposed to happen. And now, something unthinkable had. Angie's mother, Carol Dodge, was devastated. In a single moment, her world had been torn apart. Police responded immediately and began an intensive investigation. Officers cordoned off the apartment. Crime scene units collected DNA samples, photographed every inch, and interviewed neighbors. From the start, it was clear this wasn't a random accident. This was murder, calculated and carried out by someone with rage in their heart. Despite the brutal nature of the attack, police had little to go on. There were no witnesses, no signs of forced entry, and the DNA evidence collected did not match anyone in their system. That only added to the fear. If someone could kill a young woman in her home and vanish without a trace, who else might be in danger? In the following days, people locked their doors. They looked over their shoulders. The town held candlelight vigils and fundraisers for Angie's family, but no amount of support could replace the deep unease that had settled in. The police promised justice, but days turned into weeks and then into months. Leads dried up. Suspects were considered and ruled out. Meanwhile, the DNA profile sat in a lab, unmatched and mysterious. The face behind the crime remained invisible. And Angie's murder cast a long dark shadow over a town that would never be the same again. 3 long years passed after Angie Dodge's murder, and with each passing day, the hope of finding her killer began to fade. Idaho Falls was still haunted by the crime. People remembered Angie's smile, her kindness, her potential, all stolen in one horrific act. The police had collected DNA evidence early on, but without a match in any criminal database, the case stalled. Leads dried up. The killer had vanished, leaving only silence and fear in his wake. Then, in 1999, a new name surfaced: Christopher Tapp. He was a 20-year-old local with a history of petty crimes and drug use. He wasn't known for violence, but he did run with a rough crowd. The police had been under growing pressure to solve the case. With few options left, they turned their attention to Tapp, hoping he might know something or someone connected to Angie's murder. What began as a casual interview quickly turned into something more serious. Tapp was interrogated over several days, for hours at a time. The pressure mounted. Police suggested that if he cooperated, things would go easier for him. Slowly, Tapp's story began to change. At first, he denied any involvement. Then, he said he had heard things. Eventually, he confessed to being there the night Angie was killed. He even named 2 other men as accomplices. His confession seemed to unlock the mystery. Tapp described details of the crime scene that, according to detectives, only someone involved could know. It looked like the breakthrough everyone had been waiting for. The community finally had names. Finally, someone would pay for what had happened to Angie, but there was a problem. A big one. The DNA found at the crime scene, the most crucial piece of evidence, didn't match Christopher Tapp. It didn't match either of the men he claimed were with him. The state's own forensic lab confirmed it. None of them had left their DNA at the scene. That should have been a red flag. But instead of stopping, the investigation pushed forward. Prosecutors argued that Tapp may not have committed the murder himself, but he was still there, still responsible. At trial, the defense pointed to the lack of physical evidence. They highlighted how Tapp's story had changed multiple times and how police had fed him details during the interrogation. But the confession carried weight with the jury. The gruesome nature of the crime, combined with a suspect willing to admit being there, was enough. Christopher Tapp was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. For the town of Idaho Falls, it seemed like closure. Angie's mother, still deep in grief, believed justice had been served. But underneath the surface, questions remained. Why didn't the DNA match? Why were the other men never charged? And how could someone be convicted of a crime when all the hard evidence pointed elsewhere? As the years went by, more people began to wonder, was Christopher Tapp really the killer? Or had a terrible mistake been made? After Christopher Tapp was convicted, life in Idaho Falls slowly returned to normal on the surface. The case had been solved and people moved on, but not everyone found peace. Angie's mother, Angie Dodge, couldn't stop thinking about the loose ends. At first, she had believed the police when they said Tapp was responsible. She wanted justice for her daughter, and the idea that someone had been held accountable brought some relief. But as time passed, unease crept in. She started watching the video recordings of Tapp's interrogations, and what she saw disturbed her deeply. Tapp was just 20 years old when he was brought in. He had no lawyer. Over the course of several days, he was questioned for hours without rest. He seemed confused, frightened, and unsure. Carol noticed how detectives fed him information, corrected his answers, and pushed him toward a specific version of events. At one point, when Tapp got details wrong, officers told him to try again or hinted until he changed his answers. Slowly, Carol began to realize that the confession might not have been real. It might have been shaped. This realization was painful. It meant that the person she had believed was responsible for her daughter's death might be innocent. But Carol was determined to find the truth, no matter where it led. She began to speak publicly about her doubts, drawing attention from journalists, legal experts, and innocence organizations. Her courage was rare. Most people in her position would not question a conviction, especially one that seemed to offer closure. But Carol didn't care about appearances. She wanted answers. As Carol dug deeper, she discovered more troubling facts. The 2 other men Tapp had named were never charged, and there was no evidence linking them to the crime. DNA testing had advanced by then, and newer analyses continued to confirm the same thing. The male DNA at the scene didn't belong to Tapp or anyone he had accused. It belonged to someone else entirely. Someone still unknown. With the help of the Idaho Innocence Project and attorneys who took an interest in the case, a campaign to free Christopher Tapp began. They argued that his confession had been coerced, that there was no physical evidence against him, and that the DNA told the real story. The public, once convinced of his guilt, began to have second thoughts. Media outlets picked up the story. Experts criticized the interrogation tactics used in the case. Momentum grew. In 2017, after 2 decades behind bars, Christopher Tapp's conviction was vacated. He walked out of prison a free man, though his record was not yet completely cleared. Carol Dodge was there to support him, standing by the man once accused of killing her daughter. Her fight had helped bring the truth to light, but her journey was not over. With Tapp no longer a suspect, the question became urgent again. If he didn't kill Angie, then who did? The answer, they hoped, lay in the DNA. It had never changed. It had always been there, waiting. By 2019, Angie Dodge's murder had remained officially unsolved for over 2 decades. Christopher Tapp had been released and later fully exonerated, but the real killer was still unknown. The one solid clue, the male DNA found at the scene, had never changed. It had been tested and retested, always confirming the same thing. Tapp was not the source. Despite all the years that had passed, that DNA remained the key to solving the case. But without a name to match it, it meant nothing. Then, everything shifted with the rise of a revolutionary technique, genetic genealogy. Genetic genealogy was a method that used publicly available DNA databases to trace family trees and identify suspects. It had already been used to solve several cold cases, most famously the Golden State Killer case in California. In Angie Dodge's case, the Idaho Falls Police Department partnered with experts in the field to apply this same method. They uploaded the unknown DNA profile into a database and began searching for distant relatives. Through painstaking work, tracing family lines, one name finally emerged: Brian Drips. Drips had lived directly across the street from Angie Dodge in 1996. He had never been a suspect. His name had never come up during the original investigation. But now, through his family's DNA, he was linked to the crime scene. Detectives began quietly tracking him. He was living in Caldwell, Idaho, not far from Idaho Falls. Surveillance teams followed him and eventually collected a discarded cigarette. It was tested against the crime scene DNA. The match was perfect. After 23 years, they had found the source of the DNA. It was Brian Drips. Police approached Drips with the evidence. Faced with the genetic proof, he confessed. He admitted to breaking into Angie's apartment alone. He admitted to raping and killing her. He claimed he had acted impulsively and without planning. It was a shocking confession, not just for the crime itself, but for how close he had been to Angie, a neighbor, just steps away, living quietly, unnoticed for over 2 decades. What stunned many was how completely he had escaped suspicion. Despite being so close to the crime scene, his name had never been included in any reports. There had been no mention of him in witness interviews, no tips, no connections. It was as if he had committed the perfect vanishing act, hiding in plain sight while others suffered the consequences. For Christopher Tapp, the news was bittersweet. The man who had stolen so many years of his life was finally unmasked, but nothing could bring those years back. For Carol Dodge, the truth brought a complicated kind of peace. She had fought tirelessly to prove Tapp's innocence, and now she finally knew who had taken her daughter from her. The arrest of Brian Drips brought long-awaited justice, but it also exposed the deep failures in the original investigation. A young man had been wrongfully imprisoned. The real killer had walked free, and it had taken more than 20 years and the power of science to set things right. The truth behind Angie Dodge's murder finally came into focus with the arrest of Brian Drips, but the conclusion of the case left behind a trail of damage that couldn't be undone. The journey to justice had been long, painful, and filled with errors that changed lives forever. For many, it wasn't just the brutality of the crime that haunted them. It was how easily the wrong person had been blamed, and how the real killer had been ignored for over 2 decades. Christopher Tapp spent 20 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. He lost the most important years of his life, his 20s and 30s, locked away for something he had only falsely confessed to under pressure. His wrongful conviction was a result of tunnel vision, flawed interrogation tactics, and a desire to close the case quickly. The system had failed him in every possible way. Although he was eventually exonerated and received financial compensation, nothing could return the years he had lost, the relationships that had faded, or the pain he and his family endured. Carol Dodge, Angie's mother, experienced a different kind of heartbreak. She not only lost her daughter in a horrific and violent way, but later discovered that the person she believed was responsible had been innocent all along. Her decision to question the conviction took immense strength. Few people would have been able to set aside their grief and seek truth over vengeance. Her determination played a critical role in correcting the injustice, but it came with emotional consequences. She had to relive the trauma again and again, opening the wound each time she fought to uncover what really happened. The final twist in the story, that the killer had lived just across the street, was almost too disturbing to believe. Brian Drips wasn't some outsider. He was a neighbor, a quiet man who slipped through the cracks. While the community feared a faceless monster, the real danger had been living among them, unnoticed and unbothered. His ability to disappear into everyday life added a chilling layer to the story. He committed a brutal, calculated crime and then went on living as if nothing had happened. No remorse. No slip-ups. Just a void where accountability should have been. The Angie Dodge case exposed how deeply flawed a criminal investigation can become when pressure, assumptions, and flawed techniques replace evidence and patience. It showed how powerful DNA evidence can be, and how advances in science, like genetic genealogy, can rewrite history even decades later. It also highlighted how rare it is for a victim's family to fight for the freedom of an accused person, and how that courage can make all the difference. In the end, the case became more than just a story of murder. It became a lesson in justice, truth, and perseverance. No one could have predicted how this story would unfold, or how many lives it would alter along the way. The twist wasn't just wild, it was a wake-up call. Behind the headlines and courtroom drama was a quiet, relentless fight for truth. And that fight, more than anything, is what finally brought Angie Dodge's story full circle.